How could they kill our dearest people? What did the culprits do? Burned everyone. Kneeling down. Salim thinks he is 10 years old, but he isn't sure. He learned to sing from his older brother, before he died at the hands of a Buddhist mob. The family fled, like more than 500,000 others, across the border into Bangladesh. They now live in a fetid camp, indefinitely, wholly supported by humanitarian aid. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, stripped of all materiality. Salim's song comes across as an act of instinct, retelling a tale as it was told to him by his closest kin. When I set foot in Bangladesh, I started feeling better, says Muhammad Ali, a 70-year-old refugee holding an emaciated baby, clinging to the tattered grey t-shirt he has worn since he fled his village of Boli Bazaar the Friday before Eid al-Adha. This Muslim holiday is known in English as the Feast of the Sacrifice and marks the willingness of the Prophet Ibrahim, or Abraham, to kill his own son if God so commanded. A crowd of curious neighbors forms around Muhammad as he speaks in this squalid burrow built in the chaotic aftermath of the Exodus. This will be the birthplace of a generation of Rohingya, the persecuted Muslim minority known as Asia's nowhere people. Some of the boys will become casualties of the drug trade. Some of the girls will be sold for sex and smuggled abroad. Others will suffer from an almost inevitable outbreak of infectious disease. At least here, they're not killing us, Mohammed says. The UN and the US have described the violence in Myanmar as a campaign of ethnic cleansing, while rights experts say there is evidence of genocide. The former is not an independent crime under international law, but its execution can constitute crimes against humanity. Genocide, on the other hand, defined as the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a group of people based on their nationality, ethnicity, race, or faith is the world's most serious crime. But on the Bangladeshi side of the border, this is not a story about justice. It is a story of survival. In the early days of the crisis, once safely across, they slept on the side of a road with no shelter from rain or sun. A protected forest between two existing camps was felled to make room. In what the UN has labeled a critical humanitarian emergency, the refugees are now packed into makeshift shelters built from bamboo sticks and tarpaulin sheets. There is little clean water, and there are few service roads. There is no easy way to empty their latrines, which they share with some 400,000 other refugees who arrived before them. Even as more make the crossing, thousands each week until all of northern Rakhine may well be emptied, there is no more land. This is basically the definition of what we call a complex crisis, says Robert Onus, the emergency coordinator for Doctors Without Borders in Bangladesh. It's not primarily a trauma response, as it is in Syria, where he last worked. It's not a cholera epidemic, where doctors are deployed to treat an illness. It's not just famine, and it's not just ethnic or religious or political persecution. It's all of those things, all at the same time. If you focus too much on one thing, you're doing it at the exclusion of a whole range of others. That's the most complicated part of this, Onus says. Their plight has also significantly shifted the regional narrative of democratic progress. Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate who spent decades under house arrest before becoming Myanmar's de facto civilian leader in 2016, has seen her legacy all but destroyed as she failed to stop or even acknowledge atrocities committed on her watch. In the wake of Suu Kyi's spectacular undoing, a new hero has presented herself, Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, whose portrait is now strung on every roadside throughout Cox's Bazar on vinyl campaign banners lauding the Mother of Humanity. Itself a poor country and one of the world's most densely populated, Bangladesh is home to some 163 million people in a space the size of the U.S. state of Georgia. While this overburdened country has shown remarkable generosity, compassion may fade as the country's scant resources are diverted to people who aren't its nationals. Bangladesh is on the verge of unprecedented crisis, Hasina told lawmakers on November 15, according to the local news website Daily Star, adding that today's problem has been created by Myanmar authorities and Myanmar has to solve it. Since the August attacks, aid within northern Rakhine has almost completely stopped. ICRC is the only organization allowed to enter the area of operations, where few Rohingya remain. Refugee arrivals slowed in late September, but surged again in mid-October amid what some aid workers assume is a devastating famine that could trigger a final influx. Khaleda Begum, a 50-year-old woman from Alishong village, says the few Muslims left behind are now so terrified of Buddhist vigilantes they will leave their homes for one reason and one reason only, to flee. If our boys go out on the farm, they get shot, she says while perched on the side of a paddy field near the Bangladeshi village of Anjamanpura, where she has just sat down after walking for 9 days. We couldn't do anything, we just waited idly in our houses, she says. Then at midnight, they came. Goodwill exists in abundance, but resources are finite. The UN is by far the largest actor in the crisis with a $434 million emergency response plan covering all agency operations through February. But the body's idiosyncratic funding scheme operates in 6-month intervals, hindering long-term solutions. Moreover, competing catastrophes divert what aid exists, and donors must decide which lives matter most. A pledging conference held in October locked in 82% of the UN's budget for the crisis, but any shortfall will surely lead to suffering. Even amid what is viewed as a crisis overwhelmingly affecting children, UNICEF has only secured 34% of its $76 million funding goal for the current period. Upon their arrival in Bangladesh, a little more than a quarter of the refugees were vaccinated for measles and rubella in a massive drive targeting children from 6 months to 15 years of age, and a second round of catch-up vaccinations is well underway to reach its target of 336,943 children. Beginning in mid-October, more than 700,000 cholera vaccines were administered to vulnerable refugees, the largest and fastest drive ever attempted. But in a humanitarian response, even the most solid success belies failure. While there is now enough food and shelter to keep these roughly 1 million inhabitants alive, and while there are more than enough latrines to accommodate them, those facilities are not maintained. If you were to make a checklist of all the ingredients for an outbreak, here you would check almost every box, says Onus, of Doctors Without Borders. Water, sanitation and hygiene services, known in the aid world as WASH, have only been delivered to about half of those in need. Roughly 95% of refugees are already consuming contaminated water, according to the International Rescue Committee, with 2/3 of supply found to contain feces. A latrine may be usable for about 2 months, once full an X will be scrawled on its side and a new one installed just a few feet away. Agencies such as UNICEF are working toward waste management solutions, but emptying some latrines would require physically shoveling waste into a bucket and carrying it by foot to the nearest motor road, which in some cases is 6 kilometers away, over hills, across rickety bamboo footbridges, and through lanes overcrowded with unaccompanied toddlers who, oftentimes, aren't wearing any clothes. The world looks different after a tragedy. Surveying the scene from a hilltop on a recent afternoon, light rain begins to fall. Just a short shower is enough to turn footpaths into perilous slopes, and streams into toxic pools. Even ordinary things, like drops of water, can cause terror. We left before dark, as is the rule, followed by a chorus of bloated and half-naked children who have picked up a few words of English here and there. Their sing-song refrain is familiar to most who have ever been a stranger on a visit to a refugee camp. Bye-bye, the children sing to our backs as we leave. Thank you. With video by Helen Regan / Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh.